I'll give you the plane if you can fly it. Richard Caldwell's voice cut through the private hangar like a blade, dripping with the kind of contempt that only comes from someone who's never been told no in his entire privileged life. He gestured toward a severely damaged Cessna Citation X that sat in the corner of his sprawling aviation facility like a broken trophy, its fuselage dented, one wing visibly buckled. Landing gear collapsed on one side, and the cockpit glass spiderwebbed with cracks that caught the fluorescent lighting in fracture patterns. The words were meant to humiliate, designed to put someone in their place, calculated to remind everyone within earshot exactly who held power and who existed merely to serve or be mocked. Samuel Carter, 70 years old with close-cropped silver hair and hands that showed decades of careful, precise work, had only come to Caldwell Aviation Services to pick up his grandson, who worked in a maintenance crew, performing the unglamorous but essential work of keeping wealthy people's toys operational and safe. But when Samuel's 30-year-old Toyota pickup truck overheated in the parking lot right outside the main hangar, steam billowing from under the hood in dramatic white clouds that drew immediate attention, Caldwell saw an opportunity for entertainment that he simply couldn't resist. "Everyone, come look at this!" Caldwell shouted across the hangar floor, his voice echoing off the high metal ceiling as mechanics, pilots, administrative staff, and several wealthy clients began to gather, drawn by the unmistakable tone of someone setting up spectacle. His custom-tailored suit probably cost more than Samuel's truck was worth even when it was brand new, and he wore his wealth like a weapon, using it to create distance between himself and anyone he deemed beneath his station. "We've got ourselves a real expert here, folks. This gentleman clearly knows his way around vehicles, so I'm sure he understands aviation just as well. Right? That's how it works, isn't it? An engine is an engine. A vehicle is a vehicle." The sarcasm was so thick it was almost tangible, and the crowd responded with nervous laughter, the kind that comes from people who recognize cruelty but feel powerless or unwilling to challenge it. Samuel stood beside his disabled truck, his posture straight despite the mockery, his dark eyes taking in the scene with the kind of calm that comes from having faced far worse than verbal insults during a lifetime of navigating a world that too often judge people by their appearance rather than their substance. The Cessna Citation X in question was a complete disaster, a business jet that had supposedly been damaged in what Caldwell claimed was a catastrophic mechanical failure during landing, resulting in insurance claims that had made headlines in aviation industry publications. The aircraft was a total loss according to every assessment that had been filed, with damage so extensive that the manufacturer had reportedly recommended scrapping it for parts rather than attempting any kind of repair. The engines were supposedly seized beyond recovery. The avionics systems were fried. The structural integrity of the airframe was compromised to the point where flight would be impossible even if the mechanical systems could somehow be restored. Caldwell kept it prominently displayed in his hangar as a conversation piece, a reminder of his legal victory when he'd successfully sued the maintenance company that had last serviced the aircraft, extracting a 7-figure settlement that he'd bragged about to anyone who would listen. 9 certified aircraft mechanics have examined this plane, Caldwell continued, now pulling out his phone to record the scene for his social media followers, his grin wide and predatory as he captured Samuel's weathered face and work-worn clothes in the frame. 9 professionals with FAA certifications and thousands of hours of experience, and every single one of them reached the same conclusion. This aircraft will never fly again. It's finished, done, a piece of aviation history that belongs in a museum as a cautionary tale, not on any runway anywhere in the world. Samuel slowly stepped away from his overheating truck, his movements unhurried and deliberate, and his gaze swept across the crowd that had assembled to witness his humiliation with what they assumed would be his inevitable failure and embarrassment. What they saw was an elderly black man in simple work clothes stained with oil and grease. Someone they automatically assumed knew nothing about sophisticated aviation technology. Someone they could safely dismiss as out of his depth and worthy of mockery. What their prejudice and assumptions prevented them from seeing, what their eagerness to feel superior blinded them to, was the lifetime of experience and expertise that resided behind those calm dark eyes and in those steady, capable hands. "Sir," Samuel said quietly, his voice carrying despite its softness, cutting through the ambient noise of the hangar with unexpected authority. "Would you mind if I took a closer look at that citation?" Caldwell actually threw his head back and laughed, the sound harsh and mocking, genuinely entertained by what he clearly viewed as either remarkable audacity or pathetic delusion. "Oh, please be my guest. Take all the time you need. Maybe you'll spot something that 9 FAA-certified mechanics somehow missed. That would be quite the miracle, wouldn't it? Maybe we'll witness aviation history today, the day an old man with a broken-down truck revolutionized aircraft repair with his deep expertise in overheated Japanese economy vehicles." The cruelty in Caldwell's words was designed to cut deep, to reduce a human being to entertainment, to transform someone's struggle into amusement for an audience that should have known better but chose not to. The gathered crowd pulled out their phones, already recording, already composing captions in their minds about the delusional old man who thought he could repair a multi-million-dollar business jet that professionals had declared beyond salvation. As Samuel approached the damaged Cessna, something fundamental shifted in his bearing in a way that only the most observant among the crowd would have noticed. His fingers traced the buckled wing with a gentleness that seemed incongruous given the violence of the damage. And for just a moment, something that looked very much like recognition flickered across his weathered face. He walked slowly around the entire aircraft, examining it from every angle, occasionally crouching down to peer at specific components, his movements methodical and purposeful rather than random or exploratory. What Richard Caldwell and his audience of privileged spectators didn't know, what they couldn't have known because they'd never bothered to ask or care or look beyond their own assumptions, was that those calloused hands had spent 48 years working in aviation, not as a mechanic or technician, but at levels of expertise and responsibility that would have made every person in that hangar feel foolish for their mockery if they'd known the truth. You know what I find absolutely fascinating about situations like this? Caldwell addressed his growing audience, his voice booming across the hangar floor as more people emerged from offices and break rooms to see what was causing the commotion. The complete and total confidence. Look at how carefully he's examining every detail, as if he actually understands what he's looking at, as if those hands have ever touched anything more sophisticated than a lawnmower engine, or maybe the transmission on that sad little truck currently dying in my parking lot. It's almost admirable in its way. The refusal to acknowledge one's own limitations, the determination to believe that desire and confidence can somehow substitute for actual knowledge and training. The insults kept flowing, wave after wave of condescension and contempt, each comment carefully designed to diminish and degrade, to turn a human being into a punchline for the afternoon. Samuel's grandson Marcus had been sent across the facility to retrieve specialized tools and hadn't yet returned, which meant no one in that building understood the connection between them. No one realized they were publicly humiliating someone's grandfather, someone deeply loved and respected by people who actually knew him. The cruelty was pure and unfiltered, untempered by any awareness that their entertainment was someone else's family member. 45 minutes passed, then an hour, then 90 minutes, and still Samuel remained focused on the citation, his examination thorough and systematic, completely ignoring the ongoing commentary and the phones recording his every movement from multiple angles. Caldwell had started a live stream on his social media, broadcasting to his 200,000 followers, narrating the scene like it was a sporting event or reality television show. We're now 90 minutes into this incredible display of optimism over expertise, folks, and our amateur aviation expert here shows no signs of giving up, still examining every rivet and panel, still convinced that he's going to accomplish what 9 certified professionals said was impossible. I have to admire the persistence, even if the underlying premise is completely absurd. But something was beginning to shift in the atmosphere of the hangar, a subtle change in energy that the more perceptive observers were starting to notice and comment on in whispered conversations. Samuel's movements weren't random exploration or confused guessing. They were precise, confident, purposeful, following a clear diagnostic protocol that suggested deep familiarity with this specific aircraft type. He wasn't studying the plane like someone encountering it for the first time. He was examining it like someone who knew exactly what should be there, what shouldn't be there, and what the patterns of damage were actually revealing about what had really happened to this aircraft. "Hey, old-timer," shouted Travis, one of Caldwell's senior mechanics, emboldened by his employer's example and eager to earn approval through cruelty. "My brother-in-law runs a car wash in town. I could probably get you a job there if this aviation expert thing doesn't work out for you. Might be more your speed, you know? Less technical, more straightforward, better suited to your actual skill level." The joke landed exactly as intended, generating another round of harsh laughter from the assembled crowd, phones capturing every moment of what they believed was harmless entertainment at the expense of someone who'd foolishly volunteered for public humiliation. But Samuel didn't even glance in Travis's direction, didn't acknowledge the insult or respond to the provocation. At 70 years old, having navigated 7 decades in a world that too often tried to reduce him to stereotypes and assumptions, he had learned long ago that dignity wasn't found in defending yourself against fools, but in continuing to do excellent work regardless of what anyone said or thought. His hands continued their careful examination of the citation's damaged structure, and with each passing minute, with each component he studied and each system he traced, he was building a comprehensive picture in his mind. Not just of what had happened to this aircraft, but of why it had happened, how it had been made to happen, and most importantly, who had orchestrated it and why. What none of these people could possibly understand, what their prejudice and eagerness to mock prevented them from seeing clearly, was that Samuel Carter had spent 48 years as a test pilot and aeronautical engineer for the United States Air Force and later for Boeing's Experimental Aircraft Division, responsible for evaluating and certifying systems on some of the most advanced aircraft ever built. He had flown missions that remained classified decades later, tested prototypes that pushed the boundaries of what was aerodynamically possible, trained generations of military and civilian pilots in advanced techniques, and consulted on safety protocols that had saved countless lives throughout the aviation industry. His name appeared in technical manuals. His innovations had been incorporated into aircraft designs used worldwide, and his retirement ceremony had been attended by generals, aerospace executives, and some of the most respected names in aviation history. But here, in this moment, surrounded by mockery and contempt, covered in the grease from his broken-down truck and subjected to relentless humiliation, none of that mattered to anyone watching. They saw only what their prejudices told them they should see. What their assumptions convinced them was the complete picture, and they never once considered that they might be making the single biggest mistake of their professional lives. The humiliation that Richard Caldwell had orchestrated as quick afternoon entertainment was now stretching into its 3rd hour, and far from growing tired of the spectacle. The crowd seemed increasingly energized by it, feeding off the collective cruelty like participants in some ancient gladiatorial arena, where words replaced weapons, but inflicted wounds just as real. More people had wandered in from other parts of the facility, drawn by messages and texts about the show happening in the main hangar, their arrival adding fresh energy to the mockery as they quickly caught up on what they'd missed and eagerly joined in the commentary. Caldwell's social media live stream had attracted over 8,000 viewers now, with comments flooding in faster than anyone could read them, some expressing discomfort at what they were witnessing and questioning whether this had crossed a line from entertainment into something darker, but many more joining enthusiastically in the mockery with their own cruel observations and jokes about the old man who clearly didn't know when to quit. I have to say, folks, this level of commitment is genuinely impressive in its own way, Caldwell narrated into his phone, circling around Samuel like a shark that had detected blood in the water and was preparing for the final strike. Most people would have given up by now, would have admitted that maybe they were out of their depth and quietly excused themselves to avoid further embarrassment. But not this gentleman here. He's fully committed to this fantasy that he's going to solve a mystery that stumped 9 certified professionals. That takes a special kind of confidence, or perhaps a special kind of delusion. I'll let you decide which. Samuel had now opened several access panels on the Citation's fuselage, laying them out in careful sequence on the hangar floor, his movements still methodical and precise, showing no signs of frustration or uncertainty despite the ongoing mockery surrounding him like toxic fog. Travis, the mechanic who'd made the car wash joke earlier, whispered loudly to a colleague while gesturing toward Samuel. Does he even have any idea what he's looking at? I mean, seriously, at what point does this stop being entertaining and start being just sad? Someone should probably intervene before he hurts himself on all that damaged metal. Or maybe before he accidentally breaks something and we have to add property damage to the list of his problems today. But there was something about the way Samuel worked that was making several people in the crowd increasingly uncomfortable, a precision and confidence in his movements that didn't match the narrative Caldwell had constructed and was trying desperately to maintain. His hands moved without hesitation or uncertainty, reaching for specific components with the assurance of someone who knew exactly where everything should be located, checking particular systems in a logical sequence that suggested comprehensive knowledge rather than random exploration or hopeful guessing. Jennifer Martinez, one of the younger mechanics who'd been watching from the back of the crowd, leaned over to her supervisor and whispered with growing concern, "Those aren't random movements or blind exploration. He's following a very specific diagnostic protocol, checking failure points in a precise order that matches advanced troubleshooting procedures I learned in my FAA certification courses. That's not guesswork or amateur fumbling. That's systematic analysis from someone who actually knows what they're doing and understands these aircraft at a fundamental level." Her supervisor frowned, clearly uncomfortable with this observation that didn't fit the entertainment narrative everyone had been enjoying, and he quietly shushed her, not wanting to disrupt the show or challenge Caldwell's authority by suggesting that maybe, just maybe, they'd all made a terrible miscalculation. Marcus Carter pushed through the hangar's side entrance, carrying the specialized tools he'd been sent to retrieve from the far storage building, his easy smile fading instantly when he saw the massive crowd gathered around something in the center of the main floor. His heart dropped into his stomach when he recognized his grandfather at the center of the commotion, kneeling beside a severely damaged Citation while Richard Caldwell stood over him with a phone. Recording and narrating like this was all some kind of reality television show designed specifically to humiliate people for public entertainment. Marcus had worked at Caldwell Aviation Services for 2 years, keeping his head down, doing his job efficiently, and carefully avoiding his employer's attention because he'd witnessed repeatedly how Caldwell treated people he considered beneath him, the casual cruelty he inflicted on anyone who couldn't fight back without risking their livelihood. Marcus had heard the stories about Caldwell's tendency to humiliate staff members in front of customers and colleagues. His belief that wealth gave him the right to treat other human beings however he wanted without consequences or accountability. Now his own grandfather was on the receiving end of that characteristic cruelty, and every protective instinct in Marcus's body screamed at him to intervene, to stop this nightmare immediately. But he hesitated, frozen by the knowledge that revealing their relationship might cost him the job he desperately needed to support his young family. His hands trembled around the tools he was carrying, torn between family loyalty and financial necessity, between the man who'd raised him and taught him everything about dignity and the paycheck that kept his own children fed and housed. "Ah, we have a late arrival to the show," Caldwell announced, noticing Marcus's entrance, but not recognizing him as an employee since Marcus normally worked in the separate maintenance facility and rarely came into the main hangar where Caldwell entertained his wealthy clients. "Welcome, welcome. You're just in time to witness something truly special. A masterclass in misplaced confidence. A demonstration of what happens when someone confuses desire with ability, optimism with expertise. This gentleman has been attempting to diagnose and repair this totaled Citation for almost 3 hours now, and he shows absolutely no signs of accepting reality or admitting that maybe, just maybe, he's in over his head." Marcus's hands clenched around the tools until his knuckles went white, rage and helplessness warring inside him as he watched his grandfather continue working calmly, refusing to be provoked or hurried, simply maintaining his methodical examination with the same focused intensity he brought to every challenge he'd ever faced throughout his entire life. Marcus had grown up on stories about his grandfather's career, about the aircraft he'd flown and the systems he'd helped design, about the respect he'd commanded from colleagues, and the lives he'd saved through his expertise and careful attention to detail. And now he was watching that same man being treated like entertainment for people who didn't possess even a fraction of his knowledge or accomplishment. Samuel finally spoke again, his voice cutting through the ongoing commentary with unexpected clarity and quiet authority that somehow demanded attention despite its lack of volume. "Mr. Caldwell," he said, still not looking up from the citation's damaged systems, his hands continuing their careful examination even as he spoke. "I need to ask you something important about this aircraft history. The incident that caused this damage, was it investigated by the National Transportation Safety Board, or did the investigation stop at the insurance company level?" The question caught Caldwell completely off guard, disrupting his smooth flow of mockery for the first time in 3 hours, creating a momentary silence in the hangar that felt almost physical in its weight. What? Why would that possibly matter at this point? Of course, it was investigated thoroughly by multiple parties. Everything was properly documented, processed through all appropriate channels, and resolved to everyone's satisfaction. What's your point with this question? Samuel carefully removed a specific component from deep within the aircraft's avionics bay, holding it up to the light for detailed examination. His expression neutral, but his eyes sharp with focused intensity. Because Mr. Caldwell, this citation wasn't destroyed by mechanical failure during landing. This damage was caused deliberately, systematically, by someone with detailed knowledge of how to disable multiple redundant safety systems in ways that would create catastrophic failure, while appearing to be accidental malfunction to anyone who wasn't specifically looking for the signs of sabotage. The word sabotage sent a visible ripple through the assembled crowd, a dramatic shift in energy from mocking entertainment to genuine curiosity and growing concern about what was actually being revealed here. Caldwell's confident smile faltered visibly for the first time all afternoon, and though he tried to force it back into place, that momentary crack was enough to reveal the nervousness underneath the bravado, the fear of someone who suddenly realized they might not be in complete control of the situation anymore. That's absolutely ridiculous and frankly offensive. You're making wild accusations to distract from your own failure here, creating conspiracy theories because you can't accept that you're out of your depth. This aircraft's accident was witnessed by multiple people, including air traffic control, documented extensively by investigators, examined by insurance professionals, and FAA inspectors. You're embarrassing yourself with these baseless claims, and you're wasting everyone's time with this fantasy. But Samuel was already pointing to specific components with steady hands, his voice gaining strength and confidence as he explained exactly what he was seeing to an audience that was no longer laughing. This hydraulic line was cut with precision tools, then exposed to controlled heat to create burn marks suggesting system fire. These avionics connections were deliberately reversed to create electrical overload that would fry the systems while appearing to be installation error. And this structural support beam wasn't weakened by impact stress. Look at the stress patterns here. These are precisely calculated weakening points created by controlled drilling, then concealed with matching paint to hide the modification. This wasn't an accident, Mr. Caldwell. This was careful, calculated destruction designed specifically to maximize insurance payouts while appearing to meet the criteria for mechanical failure rather than deliberate damage. The hangar had gone almost completely silent now, the earlier mockery replaced by uncomfortable tension as people pressed closer to see what Samuel was indicating with his explanations. Even on Caldwell's phone screen, visible to those standing close enough, his social media viewers were flooding the comments with questions and observations, the tone shifting dramatically from cruel jokes to genuine interest and growing concern about what was being revealed. Jennifer Martinez, the young mechanic who'd earlier noticed Samuel's professional approach, stepped forward to examine the components he was pointing to, and her face went pale as she recognized the truth in what was being explained with such clarity. "Oh my God," she whispered loudly enough for others nearby to hear. "Those cuts are way too clean and precise. Those hydraulic line failures show torch marks, not impact damage." He's right. This wasn't an accident at all. Caldwell's face had drained of color now, his expensive suit suddenly looking less like armor and more like a costume, his carefully constructed image beginning to crumble under the weight of Samuel's calm, methodical deconstruction of lies that apparently everyone had accepted without question. Have you ever stayed silent when you saw something wrong, because speaking up felt too risky? What finally made you find your voice? Or do you still carry that regret? Share your story below. Sometimes admitting what we wish we'd done differently helps someone else find courage today. The revelation hung in the air like a bomb whose detonation was delayed but inevitable. And Richard Caldwell's carefully maintained expression of amused superiority had transformed into something approaching genuine panic mixed with barely controlled rage. Samuel stood up slowly from his examination position, his knees protesting the extended period of kneeling, but his posture remaining straight and dignified, and he looked directly at Caldwell for the first time since this entire ordeal had begun hours earlier. "Sir, I've spent 48 years of my professional life working with aircraft exactly like this Citation X. I know their systems, their redundancies, their failure patterns, their safety protocols. And I know the difference between honest mechanical failure and deliberate sabotage designed to look like accident damage." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the crowd that had gone from enthusiastic mockery to uncomfortable silence. "But you're absolutely right that proof matters in situations like this. So let me ask you something directly. Would you like me to call the chief aeronautical engineer at Cessna who designed the safety systems on this specific model? Because I happen to have his personal contact information, and I think Robert Chun would be extremely interested to hear about the very specific patterns of damage I've identified here today." Caldwell tried to laugh it off, but the sound came out strangled and weak, lacking any of the confident cruelty that had characterized his earlier mockery. "You expect anyone here to believe that you have the personal phone number of Cessna's chief aeronautical engineer? This is getting more absurd by the minute. What's next? You're going to tell us you have the FAA administrator on speed dial, that you're personal friends with test pilots and aerospace executives? The fantasy just keeps growing, doesn't it?" But Samuel was already pulling his phone from his pocket with hands that remained steady despite the grease covering them, and he scrolled through his contacts with the practiced ease of someone who'd made similar calls countless times throughout a long and distinguished career. His name is Robert Chun, and yes, he is Cessna's chief aeronautical engineer for business jet safety systems. We worked together for 16 years when I was consulting for Boeing on integrated avionics protocols. Would you like me to put him on speaker so everyone can hear what he has to say about the damage patterns I've documented here? The crowd pressed closer now, phones still recording, but the energy completely transformed from entertainment to anticipation, everyone sensing that they were about to witness something significant. Though many still couldn't quite believe this was anything other than an elaborate bluff. Marcus had pushed his way to the front of the gathered observers, no longer caring about his job or the consequences of revealing his connection to Samuel, tears streaming down his face as he watched his grandfather calmly dismantle the web of lies and cruelty that had been spun around him for hours. "That's my grandfather," Marcus announced loudly enough for everyone in the hangar to hear clearly, his voice shaking with emotion but strong with fierce pride. "Samuel Carter, United States Air Force test pilot for 23 years, senior aeronautical engineer for Boeing's Experimental Aircraft Division for another 25 years, holder of 14 patents related to aviation safety systems, recipient of 3 presidential citations for contributions to aerospace technology, trainer of over 300 military and civilian pilots during his career. And you've all spent the last 3 hours humiliating him for your entertainment while he was actually uncovering evidence of criminal fraud that you were all too blind or too cruel to recognize." The crowd shifted uncomfortably now, phone still recording, but people suddenly realizing they were no longer capturing harmless entertainment, but documented evidence of their own participation in something shameful and potentially criminal. Their faces and voices now permanently associated with this moment that was taking a turn none of them had anticipated when they'd gathered to watch an old man be mocked. Caldwell opened his mouth to object, to stop what was about to happen, but Samuel was already pressing the call button, and the sound of the phone ringing on speaker mode echoed through the suddenly silent hangar with the weight of impending judgment. The call connected after 3 rings, and a voice with a slight accent came through crystal clear on the speakerphone. "Samuel, my God, it's been 2 years since we last spoke? How are you enjoying retirement? Still staying busy, I hope." Robert Chen's warm greeting contrasted sharply with the cold tension that now gripped every person in that hangar. "Robert, I'm well. Thank you for asking, but I need your expertise on something urgent, and I apologize for not calling under better circumstances. I'm standing in front of a Cessna Citation X serial number." Samuel rattled off a long series of numbers and letters from manufacturer's plate he'd uncovered during his examination, and I'm seeing damage patterns and system failures that concern me greatly on multiple levels. The owner claims this aircraft was destroyed by mechanical failure during landing approach, but the physical evidence tells a very different story that I think you need to hear about immediately. There was a pause on the other end of the line, the sound of rapid typing on a keyboard clearly audible through the speaker. And then Robert Chen's voice came back with a completely different tone, sharp, professional, deeply concerned, and carrying unmistakable authority. "Samuel, I have that aircraft's complete history pulled up in our database now, and I'm looking at the original sale documentation, maintenance records, and insurance claim reports. That particular Citation X was part of our executive transport series with enhanced safety protocols that you personally consulted on during the design phase back in 2016. The redundant systems in that aircraft were specifically engineered to prevent the kind of catastrophic failure that's described in the accident reports I'm seeing here. Unless those safety systems were deliberately disabled or bypassed, the failure sequence described in these documents is essentially impossible based on the aircraft's design specifications." Samuel nodded even though Robert couldn't see him, his expression remaining calm despite the vindication those words represented. "That's exactly what I thought when I started examining the physical damage, Robert, and what I'm seeing here confirms that assessment. Multiple safety systems were deliberately disabled using techniques that required detailed knowledge of the aircraft's design, and the damage was then staged to appear like accident trauma to investigators who weren't specifically looking for sabotage indicators." Robert Chen made a sound of disgust and anger on the other end of the line, his professional composure slipping slightly as the implications of what Samuel was describing became clear. "Samuel, this is extremely serious on multiple levels. If someone deliberately destroyed one of our aircraft and then filed fraudulent insurance claims based on false accident reports, we're talking about federal crimes, including insurance fraud, false statements to investigators, and possibly FAA regulation violations that could involve criminal penalties. We take fraudulent damage claims incredibly seriously because they undermine public confidence in aviation safety and they cost the entire industry billions in increased insurance premiums. I need you to document everything you're seeing with detailed photographs and technical descriptions, and then I need to get our legal department involved immediately along with our insurance carrier's fraud investigation unit." Samuel had already begun taking comprehensive photographs during the conversation, capturing close-up images of the cut hydraulic lines, the reversed avionics connections, the deliberately weakened structural components, all the evidence that told the story of calculated destruction rather than accidental failure, documentation that would stand up to expert scrutiny in court proceedings. Jennifer Martinez had finally pushed through to stand directly beside Samuel, no longer able to remain silent despite her junior position and her fear of Caldwell's retaliation. "Mr. Carter," she said loudly enough for everyone, including Robert Chen on the speakerphone, to hear clearly. "I'm an FAA-certified aircraft mechanic working at this facility, and I was part of the team that conducted the initial damage assessment on this citation after the supposed accident. At the time, I raised concerns about several anomalies I noticed in the damage patterns, things that didn't quite match what I'd expect from the described failure sequence. But I was told to keep my observations to myself and not include them in the official report. I was told that questioning Mr. Caldwell's account of the incident would be bad for my career and could result in my termination. I've regretted staying silent ever since, and I'm prepared to provide detailed testimony about what I observed and what I was told to ignore." Her voice shook with emotion, but her words were clear and firm. A young professional finding courage in Samuel's example and finally doing what she'd known was right all along, but had been too afraid to pursue. Robert Chin's voice came through the speaker with renewed urgency and appreciation. "Young lady, what's your name, please?" Jennifer identified herself and provided her certification numbers. "MS. Martinez, your testimony is going to be crucial to this investigation, and I want you to know that you'll be protected from retaliation under federal whistleblower statutes." "Samuel, is this conversation being recorded by anyone there?" Samuel looked around at the dozens of phones still pointed in his direction, many of them clearly showing active recording indicators. "Robert, I'd estimate at least 20 people are currently recording this conversation, and it's also being live-streamed to thousands of viewers on social media by the facility owner who's been broadcasting this entire encounter for entertainment purposes." Robert Chin actually laughed at that information, though it was a sound of dark irony rather than amusement. "Well then, Mr. Caldwell has just created a comprehensive documented record of his own fraud being exposed in real time. That's going to make the prosecutors' jobs significantly easier. Samuel, I'm conferencing in our legal department right now and our insurance company's fraud investigators. Everyone stay exactly where you are." Caldwell had gone from pale to ashen to an almost grayish color, his carefully constructed empire of wealth and reputation collapsing around him with the accelerating force of an avalanche that nothing could stop or slow. His lawyer arrived moments later, apparently summoned by a frantic text message, but even the attorney looked horrified as he quickly assessed the situation. His client's own live stream providing ironclad evidence of fraud exposure, multiple witnesses including an FAA-certified mechanic providing testimony, and an internationally recognized expert connecting directly with the aircraft manufacturer's legal team. "Richard, stop talking right now," the lawyer hissed urgently. "Don't say another word to anyone without my explicit approval. We need to discuss your options privately and immediately." But the damage was already done, the truth already exposed, the evidence already documented from multiple sources and angles, and everyone in that hangar knew it. Travis, the mechanic who'd been so eager with cruel jokes about car washes earlier, was now standing as far from Caldwell as the hangar's dimensions would allow, clearly trying to distance himself from whatever legal and professional consequences were about to unfold. His earlier swagger completely evaporated. Marcus stood beside his grandfather now, one hand on Samuel's shoulder, no longer caring who saw their connection or what it might mean for his employment. "Grandpa Sam," he said quietly, using the childhood name he hadn't spoken in years, "I'm so sorry you had to endure this. I should have spoken up immediately when I saw what was happening, should have told everyone who you were, and stopped this before it went so far." Samuel turned to his grandson and smiled with genuine warmth despite everything that had happened, his eyes reflecting decades of accumulated wisdom about human nature and the long game of justice. "Marcus, you did nothing wrong, son. You were protecting yourself and your family, which is exactly what I would want you to do. You spoke up when it truly mattered, when your testimony could actually make a difference. That took real courage, and I'm proud of you for finding it when the stakes were highest." He looked around at the crowd that had transformed from mocking spectators to uncomfortable witnesses to what was rapidly becoming a federal investigation. Every person here learned something important today, whether they realize it yet or not. They learned that assumptions based on appearance can be devastatingly wrong, that cruelty always eventually encounters consequences, and that truth has a way of revealing itself if you're patient enough and skilled enough to recognize it when it emerges. The sound of sirens approaching from the distance made everyone freeze, and Caldwell's eyes went wide with something approaching genuine terror. Multiple agencies had apparently been notified simultaneously. Local police, FAA investigators, FBI agents specializing in aviation fraud, an insurance fraud investigator from 3 different companies that had paid out claims on Caldwell's supposedly damaged aircraft. The parking lot outside the hangar was about to become very crowded with law enforcement and investigators, and Richard Caldwell's afternoon of cruel entertainment was about to transform into the beginning of a legal nightmare that would define the rest of his life. Samuel calmly ended his call with Robert Shun after confirming that all relevant authorities had been notified and that Cessna's legal team will be providing full cooperation and expert testimony. He looked at the damage citation one more time, his expression thoughtful and slightly sad. 48 years I spent making aircraft safer, more reliable, more trustworthy. It bothers me deeply when someone deliberately destroys that work, that trust, for personal profit. But I suppose that's why we have laws and investigators and consequences, isn't it? To protect the honest people from those who would exploit their trust. Federal Agent Diana Foster strode through the hangar doors with the kind of commanding presence that comes from 15 years investigating complex fraud cases and developing an instinct for recognizing deception from across a room. She was accompanied by 2 FAA safety investigators, 3 FBI agents carrying evidence collection equipment, and representatives from 2 major insurance companies whose logos Samuel recognized from the claim documents he'd glimpsed during his examination of the citation. "I'm Special Agent Foster, FBI Economic Crimes Division, and this is Inspector William Grant from the FAA's Accident Investigation Branch," she announced, her badge held high enough for everyone in the hangar to see clearly while her sharp eyes swept across the scene, taking in the damaged aircraft, the crowd of witnesses, the phone still recording, and Richard Caldwell's obvious distress. "We received reports of possible insurance fraud and federal aviation safety violations being discovered at this location. Someone want to bring us up to speed on what exactly has been happening here?" Marcus stepped forward immediately, his maintenance credentials suddenly very relevant, and began explaining the situation with surprising clarity given the emotional intensity of the previous hours. His grandfather's examination of the supposedly totaled citation, the evidence of deliberate sabotage Samuel had identified, the conversation with Robert Shun at Cessna, and Jennifer Martinez's testimony about being pressured to suppress her concerns during the original damage assessment. Richard Caldwell tried to interject multiple times, his voice rising with each attempt to regain some control over the rapidly deteriorating situation. But his lawyer physically grabbed his arm and whispered urgently in his ear, clearly trying to prevent his client from making statements that would further incriminate him. "This is outrageous harassment and a violation of my rights," Caldwell managed to say before his lawyer cut him off again. "These people have invaded my property, made baseless accusations without any real evidence. And now they're attempting to destroy my reputation and my business with elaborate conspiracy theories." But Special Agent Foster held up one hand in a gesture that carried the full weight of federal authority behind it, silencing Caldwell more effectively than any words could have. "Mr. Caldwell, I strongly advise you to stop speaking immediately and consult with your attorney before making any further statements. Based on what I've been briefed on, there are serious questions that need answering, and anything you say from this point forward will be documented and can be used as evidence in federal proceedings." She turned to Samuel, her expression professional but not unkind, evaluating him with the trained eye of someone who'd learned to distinguish genuine expertise from confident bluffing. "Sir, I understand you're the individual who identified the potential fraud. Can you walk me through exactly what you found and explain your qualifications to make these technical assessments?" Samuel did exactly that, his explanation methodical and comprehensive, pointing out each piece of evidence, while Agent Foster took detailed notes and the FAA investigators photographed everything from multiple angles with professional equipment. The cut hydraulic lines with torch marks rather than impact damage, the reversed avionics connections designed to create electrical overload, the deliberately weakened structural components concealed with matching paint. Each piece of evidence was documented, tagged with reference numbers, and carefully preserved according to proper investigative protocols that would ensure admissibility in court. "And you're saying you have the expertise to make these determinations with confidence?" Inspector Grant asked, not skeptically, but seeking proper documentation for his official report. "Can you provide verification of your professional background and qualifications?" Samuel pulled out his phone again, navigating to a secure government website that listed his complete military service record, his security clearances that were still active despite his retirement, his consultation contracts with major aerospace manufacturers, and links to patents he'd filed that have been incorporated into aviation safety standards worldwide. I can provide whatever additional verification you need. Inspector. I have military service records, retirement documentation from both the Air Force and Boeing, professional certifications, security clearance confirmations, all of it properly documented through official channels and easily confirmed. Robert Shun, still monitoring the situation remotely, had already sent official documentation from Cessna confirming Samuel's consultation work on the Citation X safety systems, vouching for his technical expertise, and formally requesting that all evidence be preserved for their own parallel investigation into potential liability issues and design integrity concerns. Agent Foster read through the emails and attachments on Samuel's phone, her eyebrows rising progressively higher as she absorbed the full scope of who they were dealing with and what his presence here had accidentally uncovered. Mr. Carter, I have to say, walking into a random hangar and discovering someone with your credentials and background just happening to be available to analyze this particular aircraft, that's the kind of coincidence that makes my job significantly easier and gives me renewed faith that sometimes justice really does work out despite long odds. She turned back to Caldwell, whose face had gone through several additional shades of pale and was now settling somewhere in the vicinity of gray. Mr. Caldwell, I'm going to need you to provide comprehensive documentation of the original incident involving this citation, including all damage assessments, insurance claims, settlement agreements, and any communications with investigators or adjusters. You can either provide these voluntarily right now, or I can return within 2 hours with a federal warrant. But either way, we'll be examining those records thoroughly with expert analysis. Caldwell's lawyer stepped forward, clearly trying to establish some professional distance between his client and the mounting evidence of criminal activity. Agent Foster, my client will cooperate fully with any legitimate investigation, but we'll need proper warrants before providing access to confidential business records, and we'll need assurances about how any information will be used and who will have access to it. This appears to be a fishing expedition based on the questionable analysis of someone with unclear credentials and possible ulterior motives. But Agent Foster wasn't having any of it, her expression hardening as she responded with the calm authority of someone who dealt with obstructive lawyers countless times before. Counselor, we have expert testimony from a qualified professional with impeccable credentials identifying specific evidence of deliberate sabotage on an aircraft that was the subject of multi-million-dollar insurance claims. We have corroborating testimony from an FAA-certified mechanic employed at this facility, stating she was pressured to suppress concerns about damage anomalies. We have documentation from the aircraft manufacturer confirming that the failure sequence described in official reports was essentially impossible given the safety systems installed on this particular model. And we have all of this captured on video by multiple witnesses, including your client's own live stream. This isn't a fishing expedition. This is the beginning of a legitimate federal investigation into aviation fraud, and your client cooperation or lack thereof will be noted in our reports and presented to prosecutors. The atmosphere in the hangar had transformed completely from the mocking circus of 3 hours earlier to something heavy with consequence and legal gravity, the weight of serious federal crimes pressing down on everyone present. Travis, the mechanic who'd made the cruel car wash joke, was now standing near the exit looking genuinely ill, clearly calculating his own potential liability for whatever role he might have played in the original fraudulent damage assessment. Other staff members were huddled in small groups, whispering nervously about their jobs, their potential exposure, their futures at a facility that might not exist much longer once federal investigators finished examining its operations. The customers and visitors who'd been so eager to film Samuel's supposed humiliation were now realizing they were material witnesses to federal crimes being uncovered, their casual cruelty captured forever in footage that would likely be subpoenaed as evidence in criminal proceedings. Jennifer Martinez stood close to Samuel and Marcus, visibly shaking as the adrenaline of finally speaking truth to power began to wear off, replaced by uncertainty about what her testimony might cost her professionally, even with whistleblower protections theoretically in place. Samuel noticed her distress and spoke to her gently, his voice carrying the warmth of someone who'd mentored countless young professionals throughout his career. Mess. Martinez, what you did today took tremendous courage, and I want you to understand something important. You may face some difficult times ahead as this investigation unfolds, but you did the right thing, and that matters more than any temporary discomfort or professional uncertainty. The aviation industry needs people like you who refuse to compromise safety or integrity, even when pressured to do so. You're going to have a long and distinguished career because you demonstrated today that you have the character to stand up for what's right when it truly matters. Jennifer's eyes filled with tears at his words, and she nodded several times, unable to speak but clearly drawing strength from the recognition and encouragement of someone whose respect actually meant something. Marcus put a supportive hand on her shoulder, recognizing in her the same moral courage his grandfather had always taught him to value above professional advancement or financial security. Agent Foster was now on her phone coordinating with prosecutors and additional investigative resources, her conversation revealing the expanding scope of what they were uncovering. We need forensic accountants to examine all insurance payments received by Caldwell Aviation Services for the past 7 years, cross-referenced with aircraft damage claims and settlement agreements. I want parallel investigations opened on every aircraft that was declared a total loss by this facility during that period, with particular attention to damage patterns and assessment protocols. And I want interviews scheduled with every mechanic and technician who worked on damage evaluations, with immunity offers for those who cooperate fully and provide truthful testimony. She ended her call and addressed the crowd that still lingered in the hangar, though many people were now edging toward exits as the reality of their situation became clear. Ladies and gentlemen, this facility is now considered an active crime scene for evidence collection purposes. I need everyone who doesn't work here to clear the premises immediately and provide contact information to the officers outside so we can follow up for witness statements. If you are filming or photographing any part of today's events, that footage may become important evidence and we'll be requesting copies through proper legal channels. As people began filing out, many of them looking genuinely ashamed now that the full weight of what they participated in was becoming clear, a young man named David approached Samuel with visible emotion. Mr. Carter, I just need to say something before I leave. I was one of the people laughing earlier, one of the people who thought this was just harmless entertainment at your expense. I watched you being mocked for hours, and I didn't speak up, didn't question what was happening, just went along with the crowd because it was easier than standing out or challenging authority. Watching you maintain your dignity through all of that, watching you calmly expose the truth while everyone was treating you like a joke, that's something I'm going to carry with me for the rest of my life. I'm ashamed of my silence, but I'm also grateful for the lesson you taught without ever meaning to teach it. Thank you for that, even though I don't deserve your grace. Samuel shook the young man's hand firmly, his grip warm despite the grease still covering his fingers. Son, recognizing our failures is how we grow into better people. The fact that you're feeling ashamed right now means you have a conscience that's working properly, and that's something to build on. Don't waste energy beating yourself up over what you didn't do. Instead, commit to being the person who speaks up next time, who questions cruelty when you see it, who refuses to participate in someone else's humiliation even when everyone around you is joining in. That's how we change the world. One person at a time, choosing to be better than they were yesterday. David nodded, tears visible in his eyes, and left the hangar walking straighter than when he'd arrived, as if Samuel's forgiveness and challenge had somehow realigned something fundamental inside him. Marcus watched this exchange with fresh appreciation for his grandfather's character, seeing in that moment of grace everything he'd always admired and tried to emulate. The refusal to hold grudges, the ability to find teaching moments even in cruelty, the fundamental belief that people were capable of growth and redemption if given the chance and the challenge. Grandpa Sam, Marcus said quietly as federal investigators continued their work around them. How do you do that? How do you respond to people who participated in your humiliation with such kindness and wisdom? Doesn't part of you want them to hurt the way they hurt you? Samuel smiled and put his arm around his grandson's shoulders. Marcus, holding on to anger and bitterness is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. Those people didn't hurt me. They revealed themselves, showed their true character when they thought there were no consequences. That's valuable information, but it's not worth my peace of mind or my emotional energy. I'd rather spend my time building people up than tearing them down, even people who didn't show me the same courtesy. Inspector Grant approached with additional questions about specific technical details, and Samuel spent the next hour providing comprehensive expert analysis of every aspect of the citation's damage, explaining in clear terms that would translate well to courtroom testimony exactly how each system had been sabotaged and why the patterns definitively indicated deliberate destruction rather than accidental failure. His explanations were so thorough and well documented that Agent Foster commented multiple times about how rare it was to have such high-quality expert analysis available from the moment an investigation began, potentially saving months of work and hundreds of thousands in consultation fees. Mr. Carter, I've been investigating fraud for 15 years, and I can count on one hand the number of times we've had a witness with your combination of expertise, credibility, and willingness to provide detailed testimony. You've essentially handed us a complete case file in a single afternoon. Prosecutors are going to love you. Samuel deflected the praise with characteristic humility. Agent Foster, I just examined an aircraft the same way I've examined thousands of aircraft over 48 years. The evidence revealed itself to anyone with the knowledge to interpret what they were seeing. I just happened to have that knowledge and happened to be in the right place to notice what needed to be noticed. 4 weeks after that transformative afternoon at Caldwell Aviation Services, Samuel Carter sat in a comfortable conference room at FBI headquarters, surrounded by evidence boards covered with photographs, documents, and timeline charts that painted a picture far more extensive than anyone had initially imagined possible. Special Agent Diana Foster stood at the front of the room presenting findings to a group that included federal prosecutors, FAA officials, insurance company executives, and representatives from 3 major aircraft manufacturers whose products had been involved in Caldwell schemes. Mr. Carter's technical analysis on that Citation X was the key that unlocked everything we've discovered subsequently, Agent Foster explained, gesturing to the evidence boards with visible satisfaction. Once we started examining Caldwell's business operations with expert scrutiny, we uncovered a pattern of deliberate aircraft sabotage spanning 9 years, involving 23 different aircraft, defrauding insurance companies of approximately $19.7 million, and compromising aviation safety in ways that could have resulted in catastrophic loss of life if any of these aircraft had been returned to service based on the fraudulent damage assessments. The investigation had revealed a sophisticated operation involving a network of corrupt mechanics who would deliberately sabotage aircraft using techniques specifically designed to mimic accident damage. Insurance adjusters who'd been bribed to overlook evidence of tampering and approve inflated claims. And even some legitimate aviation businesses that have been used unwittingly to launder the fraudulent insurance payouts through fake repair contracts and parts purchases. The scope had expanded to involve not just the FBI and FAA, but also the Department of Transportation's Office of Inspector General, the IRS for massive tax evasion charges, and even international authorities, since several of the sabotaged aircraft had been sold to foreign buyers without proper disclosure of their damage history. Richard Caldwell himself was currently in federal custody without possibility of bail, facing charges that could result in 45 years in prison if convicted on all counts, with prosecutors describing him as both a flight risk and a danger to public safety given the nature of his crimes. His aviation facility had been seized as proceeds of criminal enterprise, his personal assets frozen pending restitution proceedings, and his social media accounts, once used to broadcast cruel entertainment, now served as Exhibit A in demonstrating his character, intent, and pattern of behavior. But the ripple effects of that afternoon extended far beyond criminal justice proceedings and financial restitution to victims. Marcus Carter had been promoted to operations manager when federal authorities appointed an independent management team to stabilize Caldwell Aviation Services during its restructuring and eventual sale to ethical operators. His integrity in speaking up despite personal risk, combined with his genuine skill as a mechanic and his family connection to Samuel's values and principles, made him the obvious choice to help rebuild the facility's culture and restore its reputation within the aviation community. Under his leadership, the workplace had transformed completely from a place where cruelty was entertainment and corners were cut for profit into a facility known for absolute integrity and safety assessments, where employees were valued for their expertise and character rather than their willingness to participate in questionable practices. Maintenance quality had actually improved dramatically under the new management, with several aircraft owners specifically requesting service there because they'd heard about the cultural transformation and wanted to support businesses that prioritize safety over profit margins. Jennifer Martinez had become something of a hero within the aviation safety community. Her courageous testimony and willingness to report suppressed concerns despite professional risk earning her recognition from the FAA, invitations to speak at safety conferences, and job offers from multiple prestigious aviation facilities that valued her demonstrated integrity. She'd chosen to stay at the renamed facility under Marcus's management, helping to train new mechanics not just in technical skills, but in the ethical responsibilities that came with working on aircraft that people trusted with their lives. Mr. Carter changed everything for me, she'd said during a recent interview with an aviation industry publication. Not just by exposing the fraud, though that was certainly crucial, but by modeling a different way of being in this industry. He showed me that you don't have to compromise your integrity to succeed, that speaking truth even when it's uncomfortable is what separates good mechanics from great ones, and that the respect of people who matter is worth more than the approval of people who don't. Those lessons are going to guide my entire career. The article had been widely shared within aviation circles, contributing to a broader conversation about safety culture and the importance of protecting whistleblowers who identify problems before they result in accidents. The video footage from that day had indeed gone viral in ways that exceeded even the most optimistic predictions, spreading across every social media platform with tens of millions of views, shares, and comments from around the world. But contrary to what Caldwell might have feared before his arrest, the primary narrative wasn't about his public humiliation or his criminal exposure. It was about Samuel's dignity, his patience, his expertise revealed through quiet competence rather than loud boasting, and the broader lessons about prejudice, assumptions, and the importance of recognizing human worth beyond surface appearances. The footage had been edited and shared in hundreds of different versions, each one highlighting different aspects of the story. Some focused on the technical revelation of the sabotage, others on the emotional reunion between Samuel and Marcus, many on the transformation of witnesses from mockery to shame as they recognized their participation in cruelty, and countless discussions about how racial and age-based prejudice continued to operate in professional settings despite decades of supposed progress. Samuel had been interviewed by national news programs, aviation industry publications, and even international media outlets interested in the intersection of social justice, corporate crime, aviation safety, and the viral nature of modern digital storytelling. Robert Chun had personally flown from Cessna headquarters to meet with Samuel again, bringing with him not just gratitude from the company for helping expose fraud that had damaged their brand reputation and potentially compromised public safety, but also a formal proposal that had been unanimously approved by their board of directors. Samuel, my friend, Robert had said over dinner at a restaurant with actual tablecloths and multiple forks, a far cry from the hangar where everything had begun. We've been discussing in our executive meetings how to properly honor your career contributions and your continued impact on our industry, even in retirement. We would like to establish the Samuel Carter Aviation Safety and Ethics Institute, a comprehensive training program that would bring young aviation professionals to our facilities for intensive education, not just in technical skills, but in safety culture, professional integrity, ethical decision-making, and the responsibilities that come with working on machines that people trust with their lives and the lives of their families. We want to teach the next generation not just how to build and maintain excellent aircraft, but how to be excellent human beings who happen to work in aviation. Would you be willing to serve as the Institute's founding director and help develop its curriculum and values? Samuel had been moved to genuine tears by the offer, not because of the honor itself, though that certainly mattered deeply, but because it represented exactly the kind of legacy he'd hoped to leave behind when he'd finally retired from active aerospace work. Robert, nothing would make me prouder than helping train young aviation professionals who understand that technical excellence and moral character aren't separate things, but fundamentally connected aspects of the same commitment. When you work on aircraft, when you certify systems as safe, when you make decisions that affect whether families get home safely, you're accepting a sacred responsibility that goes far beyond mechanical competence. I would be deeply honored to help teach that to the next generation and to help create a culture where safety and integrity are valued above convenience and profit. The Institute program was announced with significant fanfare in aviation industry press and general media, with the first cohort of 20 young professionals from 8 different countries scheduled to begin their training in 4 months. Applications had poured in from around the world, young people inspired by Samuel's story and eager to learn from someone who embodied the principles they aspired to embrace, who demonstrated under the worst possible circumstances what it meant to maintain integrity when facing mockery and prejudice. But perhaps the most significant and personally meaningful impact of that day was felt closest to home, in the community where Samuel had lived quietly for 15 years since retiring from Boeing and moving back to be near his family. Young people from a neighborhood had started showing up at his small workshop behind his house in increasing numbers, drawn by the viral videos and the realization that this humble man who'd helped their parents with car repairs and given patient advice about mechanical problems was actually a legendary figure in aviation history. Samuel welcomed them all without hesitation or prejudice, setting up what became an informal mentorship program where teenagers and young adults could learn not just about engines and aerodynamics and systems integration, but about patience, precision, the satisfaction that comes from mastering complex skills through dedicated practice, and the importance of using knowledge to serve others rather than just advance yourself. His workshop became a gathering place where excellence was celebrated regardless of where it came from, where mistakes were treated as learning opportunities rather than failures to be punished, where young people of all backgrounds could find encouragement and guidance from someone who saw their potential rather than their limitations or the prejudices society tried to impose on them. Deshaun Williams, a 17-year-old who'd been written off by teachers and counselors as someone without college potential, was among Samuel's most dedicated students and had become something of a symbol for the program's transformative power. Mr. Carter, the young man had said during one of their early conversations, his voice carrying a mixture of hope and uncertainty. Everyone in my life has always told me what I can't do, what I'm not smart enough for, what people like me aren't supposed to achieve. But watching that video of you, seeing how you handled all that disrespect and mockery with such dignity and then proved everyone wrong not by talking, but by demonstrating what you actually knew, that showed me something I never really believed before. It showed me that other people's opinions about my potential don't actually define what I'm capable of if I'm willing to work hard and learn from people who actually know what they're talking about. Samuel had taken Deshaun under his wing immediately, recognizing in his earnest hunger for knowledge and guidance the same potential he'd seen in countless young people throughout his career, the raw talent that just needed proper mentorship and genuine encouragement to flourish. Now, 8 months later, Deshaun had not only completed his GED, but had been accepted to Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University on a full scholarship funded by the Aviation Safety Institute that bore Samuel's name, carrying with him letters of recommendation from Samuel, Robert Shun, and 3 other industry leaders who'd met him during visits to Samuel's workshop. In his application essay, Deshaun had written words that Samuel kept in a frame on his workshop wall. I used to think success meant proving wrong all the people who doubted me, showing them they'd underestimated my potential. But Mr. Carter taught me something more important. That real success means using your abilities to lift others up, to make the world safer and better, to pass on knowledge and opportunity to the next person who needs a chance like someone gave you. That's the kind of engineer I want to be, the kind of person I want to become. Not someone who hoards knowledge to feel superior, but someone who shares it generously to create a rising tide that lifts everyone. Samuel had cried when he first read those words, recognizing in them the truest measure of a teacher's success. Not the awards or recognition, but the moment when a student internalizes values deeply enough to articulate them in their own voice and carry them forward into their own life and work. Marcus often stopped by his grandfather's workshop on weekends, bringing his own children to learn from their great-grandfather and to absorb the lessons that couldn't be taught through words alone, but had to be experienced through observation and practice and patient guidance. Grandpa Sam, Marcus had said recently while watching Samuel work with a group of 8 students on a complex engine diagnostic problem. You could be fully retired now, relaxing on a beach somewhere, traveling the world, enjoying your golden years without all this responsibility and work. Why do you keep taking on more students, more projects, more ways to serve other people when you've already earned the right to rest? Samuel had looked up from the engine, his eyes still sharp despite his 70 years, twinkling with the joy that came from work that felt like purpose rather than obligation. Marcus, I spent 48 years of my career making aircraft safer and more reliable, helping people travel to see loved ones and do important work and explore the world. That was meaningful work, and I'm grateful for every moment of it. But these young people here, they're not machines I'm optimizing or systems I'm debugging. Their lives I'm helping launch, futures I'm helping shape, potential I'm helping unlock. Every one of them will carry forward not just technical knowledge, but values, principles, ways of seeing their work and their responsibilities to others. That's not work, son. That's legacy, and it's the most important thing I've ever done or ever will do. The footage from that day at Caldwell Aviation Services had created unexpected connections and opportunities that continued to emerge months later. Samuel received letters almost daily from people around the world sharing their own stories of being underestimated, dismissed, or mocked because of their age, race, appearance, economic circumstances, or other factors that had nothing to do with their actual abilities or potential. Many wrote about finding courage in his example, to continue pursuing excellence despite facing prejudice and discrimination, to maintain dignity in the face of disrespect, to trust that truth and competence would eventually reveal themselves if they remained committed to integrity and kept doing excellent work regardless of recognition. Samuel responded personally to as many letters as he could manage, especially those from young people struggling with self-doubt or facing active discrimination, offering encouragement and reminding them that their worth wasn't determined by others' opinions, but by their own commitment to being people of character and competence who use their abilities to serve others and make the world better in whatever ways their particular talents allowed. Travis, the mechanic who'd made that cruel car wash joke during the initial mockery, had undergone his own transformation that was documented in a YouTube video he'd posted that had itself gone viral within aviation communities. In it, he'd spoken honestly about his participation in Samuel's humiliation, his shame at recognizing his own cruelty when watching the footage later, and his commitment to becoming a better person who stood up against prejudice rather than participating in it. He'd sought out Samuel repeatedly in the weeks following the incident, not just to apologize, but to learn, spending hours listening to stories about integrity, professionalism, and the importance of treating every person with respect regardless of their apparent status or circumstances. Mr. Carter fundamentally changed how I see the world and my place in it, Travis had said in his video. I thought I was successful because I was good at my job and could make people laugh with my jokes, but I was really just a bully hiding behind technical competence and using cruelty to feel superior to others. Samuel showed me, through his actions, not through lectures or judgment, what it actually means to be a professional and a decent human being. I can't undo my participation in his humiliation, but I can commit to being someone who would never participate in something like that again, and who would actively intervene if I saw it happening to someone else. Rebecca Thompson, the former sales manager at Caldwell Aviation, who'd remained silent during Samuel's humiliation, but had later provided crucial evidence about other fraudulent schemes once the investigation began, had been promoted to general manager of the restructured facility and had implemented comprehensive training programs focused on ethical business practices, safety culture, and respect for all customers and colleagues regardless of their appearance or assumed status. Mr. Carter's example changed everything for everyone who witnessed it or heard about it, she'd said during a staff meeting 6 months after the incident. He showed us that dignity and competence don't need to announce themselves loudly or defend themselves aggressively. They simply exist, and they reveal themselves through patient, excellent work and through maintaining integrity, even when facing mockery. That's the culture we're building here now, one where safety and excellence matter more than profits, where integrity is valued more than quarterly revenue targets, where every person is treated as a human being worthy of respect rather than as a potential mark to be exploited or entertainment to be mocked. We're proving every day that ethical business practices aren't just morally superior, but actually more successful in the long term, building reputation and trust that no amount of aggressive sales tactics or corner cutting could ever create. Special Agent Foster had told Samuel during their final evidence review session that his case would be used as a primary training example in FBI courses on fraud investigation, particularly the importance of expert witnesses, the value of preserving evidence from the moment suspicions arise, and the power of clear, confident testimony in building cases that could withstand aggressive defense strategies. Mr. Carter, the way you documented everything you found, the clarity of your technical explanations, the unshakable credibility you brought to every aspect of this investigation. That's textbook perfect witness cooperation that made our jobs exponentially easier and saved probably a year of investigation time and hundreds of thousands in expert consultation fees. You didn't just help us catch one criminal and his network of accomplices. You helped us refine our investigative processes in ways that will benefit countless future cases and potentially prevent frauds before they reach the scale of what Caldwell achieved. That kind of contribution to law enforcement and public safety is impossible to quantify, but it's deeply appreciated by everyone in this building. Samuel had been honored by the recognition, but remained characteristically humble about his role. Agent Foster, I just examined what was in front of me and reported accurately what I observed. Any qualified aviation professional would have done the same thing if they'd been in my position. I just happened to be in the right place at the right time with the right knowledge to recognize what needed to be recognized. As Samuel sat in his workshop on a quiet evening nearly a year after that transformative afternoon, surrounded by tools he'd collected over nearly 5 decades, and young people who'd come to see him as mentor and guide and living example of what it meant to live with integrity, he reflected on the strange way life had unfolded from that single moment of automotive failure. His truck overheating in that particular parking lot, at that particular moment, in front of that particular person who decided to turn mechanical trouble into entertainment. It had seemed like terrible luck at the time, an embarrassing inconvenience that turned into hours of public humiliation and mockery. But looking back now, seeing all the lives that had been changed for the better, the massive fraud that had been exposed before it could claim more victims or potentially cause deaths if sabotaged aircraft had been returned to service, the young people who'd been inspired and given opportunities they wouldn't have otherwise had, the programs and institutes that had been created, the cultural conversations that had been sparked about prejudice and dignity and the importance of looking beyond surface appearances. It all felt less like random misfortune and more like purpose revealing itself through circumstances that had seemed negative in the moment, but contained seeds of transformation that just needed time and patience to grow. Everything happens for a reason was still a phrase Samuel approached with philosophical skepticism, preferring to believe that people created meaning through their responses to circumstances rather than circumstances having inherent predetermined meaning. But if pressed, he might now admit that sometimes random events aligned in ways that allowed truth to emerge, justice to prevail, and good to triumph over cruelty. Not through magic or supernatural intervention, but through the patient, determined work of people committed to integrity, even when facing mockery and prejudice. People who refuse to let others' opinions define their worth or dictate their actions. People who understood that the best response to cruelty wasn't revenge, but simply continuing to do excellent work, and trusting that truth had a way of revealing itself to those willing to look carefully and honestly at the evidence right in front of them. And in that belief, in that commitment to patient excellence and quiet dignity, lay something more powerful than any amount of wealth or status or social media followers could ever provide. The unshakable knowledge that your life had mattered, that your work had made the world safer and better, and that the people you'd helped along the way would carry those lessons forward into their own lives and pass them on to yet another generation that needed to learn that character and competence were the only currencies that truly mattered in the end. If Samuel's journey reminded you that patience and integrity always outlast arrogance and cruelty, I'd be deeply honored if you'd subscribe and share this with someone who needs encouragement today. And please, tell me in the comments about the teachers, mentors, or even strangers who showed you what quiet strength looks like. The people who maintained their dignity when others tried to strip it away, who did excellent work when no one was watching, who lifted you up when the world tried to hold you down. Your stories create a community that believes character still matters in a world that too often celebrates the wrong things. What story should we tell next? What lessons do you need to hear? This channel exists because people like you believe that dignity, truth, and excellence matter more than wealth, status, or popularity. Thank you for being here, for caring about these values, and for helping build something that honors the best of what humans can be when we choose integrity over cruelty and service over selfishness.